a reaction that can make you feel out of body or not yourself, make you feel like a little kid, fight or flight.
It literally is instinctual, primal.
Yes.
I feel like you have to get to a huge level of work to realize you're having a trauma response when you're having the trauma response. Obviously, my mom passed away when I was younger, so then I didn't have the softness of a mother when I had my own child.
Yeah. We are a traumatized nation and people, and I think just Black people in general are traumatized in a lot of ways.
Always said, be careful of those island boys.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Rumbi.
Welcome to It's Layered Podcast.
We're part of the Black Cast Network, powered by iHeart, and as you may already know, we're recording live in studio here in Melbourne.
Yeah, Bittersweet Studios. Such a beautiful setup today, done by Pink Lady Picnics. We're so grateful to be in this welcoming, safe space.
Shout out to Maggie behind the camera, who's been holding us down too. So
definitely,
Black women or Black-powered, female-owned businesses doing the thing, and that's why we're so excited.
Yeah, so especially when you want to talk about something really vulnerable like trauma. I feel like the people you're around, the people that surround you, the space you're in, is very, very important for such like vulnerable conversations.
Absolutely, and to feel like you don't need to mince your words, or like you can just be who you are is great. So we're talking about trauma and its manifestation in our lives. How does personal trauma manifest in your life, do you feel?
Stay triggered.
Have you clocked it?
Stay triggered. You know what? This is, I guess, therapy speech, right? Where you don't know what trauma, you know what trauma is, but sometimes you might not even recognize you're going through it or that it's manifesting in other parts of your life.
Yes.
You think, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Especially as Black women. We're meant to be strong and have it all together, and I think our generation is really beginning to question that.
Yeah.
Are we strong? Do we have it all together?
Not at all.
Doesn't it manifest in other ways and creep up in ways you don't expect?
I think it's definitely, you're coping. So you think, this is not, it's happened to me many times. Like, I'm fine. I'm not affected. I'm not emotional. I'm not. And then it's like, actually, it's affected. So it's so true, and sometimes you don't realize it, and only after the fact you realize, like, oh, that was a trauma response.
Or when you go back to the scene of the crime, like when you return home, or you spend a lot of time with family, and then you realize, oh, have I not healed and coped? I've just avoided.
Yes, 100%. Yo, girl. So let's maybe define trauma, because as you said, it's therapy speak, and we all hear trauma, triggered, trauma response. How would you define trauma?
For me personally, it's something that you would have gone through, seen, been a part of. That's not the norm.
Yeah. Or healthy norm.
And you find or are forced to find ways to live with it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, you went through that. Now what?
Yes.
You went through that whole huge thing. Now what? And a lot of people just sweep it under the rug, and then that's when it starts to manifest and come out, and they get triggered by everything. And a lot of people nowadays are beginning to address it and actually go back, that inner child, all the way back to their childhood.
Yeah.
I mean, what about for you?
I think trauma is, for me, painful experiences that you have in your life, whether in childhood through to yesterday, today, whatever, that affect your nervous system, that instill a reaction that can make you feel out of body or not yourself, make you feel like a little kid, fight or flight, you freeze up, where you spiral and maybe start thinking worst case scenarios all over. So I really feel like trauma is that. It's like fight. It creates this reaction in you that is not where you feel unsafe.
Like off your baseline, essentially.
And you feel unsafe and you feel like violated or vulnerable. And then there are ripple effects thereof where you may cope, as Amanda said, in different ways, whether it's being sweeping under the rug, or maybe now anytime someone speaks to you in a certain way, you're like ready to like
takes
fight,
you back to that.
You back, or you start fighting and being like, oh, don't talk to me like that, you know. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. And obviously it can manifest in different ways. Like the physical, you can actually literally feel sick, reliving the moment, or dealing with the consequences of that moment, the traumatic event.
Yes.
It can be emotional, where you're like literally an emotional wreck, panic attacks, all that stuff, where you're like, I can't get past this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Dr. Gabor Mate, I've said this before, I think on a TikTok, he speaks about a lot of sort of autoimmune diseases are prevalent in women because what happens when you experience trauma and when you don't address it and don't deal with it, it then manifests physically in the form of autoimmune diseases. And your body is almost like saying, this is not okay. But sometimes when you suppress that, then you become ill, and cancer and all these kind of things. And then, of course, emotionally, it's like maybe you're off kilter, maybe you start being defensive, maybe you become
cry a lot,
over emotional, you don't know how to regulate, so all of a sudden you're just like in tears when a second ago. So many ways.
And behavioral, right? Lots of people will like do actions that don't make sense, and then you realize, oh, it's for them, that's their flight or flight freeze or trauma response.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like sometimes people do it subconsciously.
Absolutely.
Like that. And also sometimes I feel like we can suppress it for years, and then you think, and then it can just all come back up again, which is why I was saying when you go back to the scene of the crime. Because you can be away from home for like 6-7 years and never feel any which way or triggered. And then the moment you land, something happens, or you see someone, or you some people PTSD, all that stuff, it's...
Yes. And when we speak about triggers, I think we're saying it's like something happens that your reference goes back to that moment.
Takes you back to that moment
of pain or whatever you experience, and then you act out of character, or you start behaving a certain way because it's taking you to that. So you're trying to either protect yourself from not being hurt again, or does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's,
or you try to even do it sometimes even differently. Like, had you done this would have been. So then now you overextend that response.
Yes.
Because then you're like, oh, no, it's not exactly as you said. It's not going to happen to me again. Or it can't happen to me again.
Yeah.
And then some people just shut down completely. I mean, as a people, being Zimbabwean, people ask us about our economy and, being under dictatorship. But some of the stuff that happened during that time was very traumatic.
Very.
Very, very
we
traumatic.
We are a traumatized nation and people. And I think just Black people in general are traumatized in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But do you feel like our trauma is trivialized in Zimbabwe?
Oh, certainly.
And why?
Because it's just that notion that, who doesn't have issues or who doesn't have
we all got
problems.
pains,
like we're not going to all, cry about it, or, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like people just... And also, I don't think people want to be stuck there. So their only feeling is, okay, I don't want to sit and moan and groan about this, so let's just move on. Yeah. So then people are like, or some stuff becomes unspoken about, you know. We already dealt with that. Now we're on to the next thing,
But have we really?
But we haven't.
More often than not, we haven't.
Have not. Because sometimes when you fight with your African parents and they bring up something they used to do as a kid, they're like, whoa. Talk about your inner child needing a hug.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think our story as Black people, people of color, Africans, Zimbabweans, we can go on, women. I think there's a lot of things we've had to fight. If you think about women in general, like the right to vote, the right to, our own bodies, the right. Then you go like slavery, then you go colonization. Then you go like for economic empowerment, so many things you constantly have to fight for. So as you rightly said, we've all suffered. So it's like, so what now? We have to keep going. That's how I think we've survived.
Yeah.
It's to just, you keep going.
Survival mode.
Yeah, literally. Otherwise we'd all break.
You don't have time, like even when you think about it now, bringing it into our context now, people who are living in war-torn areas or you don't have time to be like, what did happen last week? You're like living for today, for the now, for tomorrow. So I feel like sometimes we as a people, we are stuck there and we're still living in such a way. Yeah. And I know this season we're like about soft life and leaning into our feminine, but definitely our masculine is right up there because we've had to dig deep and do things that are, to make things work.
Yeah.
And for so long, and when you do that for so long and that's all you know, to unpack that
it's a lot.
Is a lot.
And sometimes I find for me it manifests in even when I don't need to be the fighter or strong, it's like I'm already in that. And it's like you have to take note that no, someone wants to help me or I don't have to do this alone. Or trusting someone else. So then it's like you constantly having to check yourself that, okay, you don't need to fight this.
Yeah. Why do you think Zimbabweans especially have unresolved trauma?
I think, as I alluded to, like when you've been colonized and then you had to go through a war to like liberate yourself as a country. So you've seen a lot, right? So there's that aspect. Then the world opens up to you and you're like, okay, now we have our freedom. But I don't think talking about trauma or mental health was a thing back in the 80s when we were liberated. Yeah. So then now it was like, get on with this economic freedom, so to speak. And then obviously we know what happened, with farm invasions and so on and so forth. And the economy spiraling as a result, and political issues and all these things. So things just started coming at us from all angles, losing, wealth overnight or, investments overnight, and then just trying to make ends meet. Then you're trying to just make sure your children are educated. You're trying to start a life somewhere new. All these things. So literally you're just survival. You need to survive. Go.
Yeah,
There's no time, because if you sit in it, you'll never get out of it, right?
Yeah.
And then there's other aspects socially, right? Like domestic violence we've spoken about before. There's the patriarchy side of things where what I say goes no matter how you feel or how you're suffering in this context. Abuse, emotional, financial abuse is rife because of the economy. So there's all these things that are just like blowing up. And then on a global scale, like as you talk about war and, xenophobia and tensions between nations, and it's a lot. So when you're just trying to navigate that, I think sometimes people are like, why do I need to sit and figure out my emotions here? We keep it moving.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you don't want to kicking up dust, right?
Yes.
Stuff is settled or seemingly settled, and you don't want to be the one who's like, people are like, come on, man, now in 2025, why are you bringing up things from like 20 years ago? But I think that's the only way it can be resolved, like going back and actually... And also, I think for Zimbabweans in particular, it's like for us, we both said we left Zim, and then now we're trying to deal with childhood trauma, whatever. But we also have a soft landing place after, because all these things are brought up to the surface, and then it's like you need to start dealing with them, right?
Yes.
And then the space you're now in needs to support that past trauma for you to be able to deal. Yeah. So I feel like Zimbabweans don't still feel safe yet.
At all.
So then it's like, well, as long as they're unsafe, then they have to stay in survivor mode.
Yeah.
Because they can't be soft and unfurl and open and let you in, because then that leaves them vulnerable, right? Because the space they're still in still doesn't support them being safe, So it's like...
It begs the question I'm going to ask you. As the season, we've been about the soft girl era and like celebrating our soft side. Are we lucky and privileged that we even can have that?
Oh, for sure.
And the guilt associated that, okay, we get to have this. And this is another thing where social media gets very tricky, is that, you see other people living the soft, jet setting, what. And there's other people who have a completely different experience of it. And it's saying it's possible. And we also want that. I don't think people are sitting there suffering saying, I don't want a good life or soft life. But the privilege of that.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It's definitely very privileged. I mean, even having this conversation right now in this beautiful setting,
Yes.
it's a privileged space, a safe space, but it only does come with access and privilege.
Yes.
You know, I'm sure girls in Zimbabwe would love to swap with us right now in a millisecond, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like, that's not reality.
And I think sometimes you have to
yeah.
keep checking yourself and say, like, yes, life is harder because we know even when you're living away from home, you have to work twice, 3 times as hard to get half as much. But sometimes taking stock and saying, oh, at least I've gotten to do this and I've gotten
and
to
the space is safe.
Exactly. How does trauma affect our relationships and self, like relationship with self and with others as a result? Like,
it permeates into everything, doesn't it? Like, I mean, we just talked about having kids or not having kids. And a lot of people's birth stories of how they bring these kids into the world are filled with trauma. And for my own personal journey, obviously my mom passed away when I was younger, so then I didn't have the softness of a mother when I had my own child.
Yeah.
You know, I love seeing those TikToks when like they're like, oh, you know, my mom was excited about the kid, but she also has her own baby who's just had a baby.
Yes.
You know, you see the mom rushing in and like trying to like touch the
Take care
daughter,
of the
and the
daughter.
grandchild is another thought, which is
Yeah.
beautiful for me to see, right? But then I obviously didn't get to experience that. Where it's like, okay, from birth, I'm already still just solo and obviously you try to find your own ways. My cousin came over to help me, but it's not the same. And she wasn't trying to take up that role, which is fine. But like, it just makes you think, oh my gosh, I've just gone through such a traumatic event. And further trauma of not having the right person or the person I think is right to support me through. So I feel like it's just one of those things where it keeps coming up, right? The fact that I lost my mom young, and it is a traumatic thing. And it's not something you can just be like, oh yeah, I've dealt with it now. It will always, but now
because
I think
always moments.
Yeah, it'll always be moments. But I think now the key is how do you deal with it? You know, you can sit there and wallow, of course, and some days you need it. You need to have that cathartic feeling of crying it all out. But some days you just realize, you know what? At least I could still bring my cousin here. At least Rumbi could come over. You know, at least. You know, Tu could come over and help me. I have a supportive partner. Like, so it's one of those things where you let yourself go there, but then you also let yourself be kind to yourself. Because it does permeate into everything, you know. And that's why therapy also comes in clutch.
Yeah, for sure.
But also therapy, as you said, is a privileged space.
It is a privilege. It definitely is.
Yeah.
I think trauma shows up in how you relate in relationships,
Definitely.
like partnership, friendship. Like for me, sometimes I'm like, if I'm going through a challenging, especially with friends, I'm like, well, I can move on. Like I don't, I'm quick to just like shut off. And I think that is a trauma response, right?
Yeah, I won't be hurt, so I'll just shut off before I'm hurt.
I'll be fine. I don't need anybody anyway.
Yeah.
You know, so you see that and you have to actively work on like, okay, how do we move through this in this relationship? I think it shows up in sometimes not letting your guard down. I think for a long time it was, I don't trust men. Yeah. And though, I mean, men don't make it easy for us to trust them. I'm just saying.
Not all men.
You know, I think they're the ops. I think there's some sort of, you know, but aside from that, like learning to allow yourself to be loved, for someone to be gentle with you and not expect the worst always. Like I think you start thinking all the way, you gonna turn now? Okay, this is gonna switch up now, which is very sad. Yeah. But it is a trauma response because I think how many aunts and relatives, mothers, cousins did we see growing up, going through some really traumatic relationships where you're like, why do people get married? Why do people try and have partners or children together? So a lot of unlearning has to be done. Definitely. And consuming different content. Like I think sometimes the negative is always so prevalent and then the good is not always brought to the surface and we don't shine a light on it enough. But I really think there's a scale all the time. There's negative and there's positive, and you really have to seek out the positive to help. Yeah.
And I feel like trauma is mainly sometimes your trauma response is reflection. Because in the moment, you're just like, it literally is instinctual, primal.
Yes.
I feel like you have to get to a huge level of work to realize you're having a trauma response. When you're having the trauma response, usually a lot of times that's when you have to get comfortable with apologizing, sincere apologies to your friends when you like do something like out of character, or then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, this space I'm in, or this reminded me of this and that. So I feel like it's also having safe people around you that you don't have to explain yourself to every single person you meet.
Yes.
But sometimes when you do something that's really, especially when it's in the negative, and like shouting at people, raising your voice, all these kind of things, which might also end up triggering someone else.
Yes.
We have to always reflect bring ourselves back and find explanation, and then also find ways of coping.
Yes.
Because
you can't exist
healthy. Yeah, you can't just shout at everyone and go, sorry, trauma response, sorry,
And we talk about this often. There's a lot of therapy speak where people try and use therapy to excuse their behavior, Jonah Hill, and being douchebags and whatever. I don't like you because talking to other men because it's a trauma, and then I think it triggers me. You're gonna cheat on me. No, fix yourself. Type of
like
thing.
I can't have to be able to talk to people.
Exactly. And I think for me, something I heard not too long ago was that emotions last for a couple of seconds, and so it's about how long we allow ourselves in that.
Yes.
So I think similarly with trauma responses, I think it's normal to feel an emotion, and as you work through it, maybe it becomes less extreme.
Yeah.
Maybe last.
Or find out where it comes from.
Yes, it doesn't last as long. And I think it's normal to feel certain things, but it's how we then address it. So it's like, this hurt me. You could sit in there like, I'm so hurt, poor old me, I'm the victim, and you can wallow for life or, weeks on end. But it's like, this hurt me. Why did it hurt me? And why does it bring up these feelings?
Yeah.
And what could be done differently? Is it something I could have done? Is it something that could have been done by someone else? And how do I go from here? Allowing ourselves to feel, but also saying, okay, clearly I still feel triggered by this. I need to work on that.
Yeah. Because, being a douchebag does not, or feeling a trauma response does not negate being, like, if you're still a douche, you're a douche.
And you see it on, like, Love is Blind now. More and more. As the seasons have gone, more and more of these men are coming on. Hey, look at me saying men.
These men. But it's mainly men, let's not lie.
Come and they're like, Ramses. Like, saying, because blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Take
like
ownership.
If you had your trauma as a migrant in America, you can't take it out on the Americans you want to date.
Yes.
Like, I feel like therapy speak and people saying, I'm traumatized has become trivialized as well. So it's like people just use it as like almost like a badge of honor. But in a bad way.
Then comes the trauma bonding.
Yeah,
as we saw with Alex and Tim. Was it Alex and Tim?
Tim, yes.
Where he's telling her his whole life story, his sister, depression,
who died. Yeah,
and then he's meeting her dad and saying, "Can I have her hand?" And then the next thing is like, "I never want to see you again."
Then they didn't have fun in their relationship because,
But that's because you're basing all that. And I think something we need to learn in life, just because someone tells you all their trauma, doesn't mean that it makes the relationship stronger. I don't know. It doesn't make the relationship more valuable. Because as we say, trauma bonding. But I think it's like you shouldn't celebrate like, they opened up for me. It's like, okay, how are they healing from this? It's probably the
those are the questions you need to be asking.
Part of this.
Yeah. And why are they trauma dumping on me? Like there's
exactly. I think we used to, especially I think when we were growing up, like when guys didn't open up, so when a guy like opened up a little bit, like, oh my gosh, he's confided in me. But is it confiding or is it dumping and then just like moving on?
And guys are really good with that. I mean, a lot of couples break up after something traumatic happens, losing a child, miscarriages, all these things, because it's hard when you're both trying to deal and to also be there for each other. So, and that's sometimes really the only thing is therapy where you can deal with such. But what do you think about our people? Because obviously miscarriages and death in the family or whatever it is still happens in spaces where therapy is not so accessible or acceptable.
Yeah.
How do you think they?
That's
they
why they
deal?
fling
Do you
themselves when they arrive at the funeral.
Yeah.
Oh my
Or do you
gosh.
reckon they just use religion
Yes.
in that space?
I think our people don't have much in terms of like money or like self, like healing in terms of therapy, as you said, and like all these things. So one thing we cling onto is religion.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be very clear. Religion helps to give hope, but it can't be the only answer for everything, because I think sometimes we use religion to suppress feelings and to say everything is all right.
There's a reason. God has a
Yes,
reason. Yeah.
but we force acceptance without going through the steps of grief.
Yeah.
Do you understand? Like
And anger.
and anger, and we just say it is what it is, and I must accept. And we almost hide behind religion as a way of like, all will be well. But are you well?
Yeah.
Are you truly well?
Yeah.
And will it be well for you?
And you see it all the time with Zimbabweans. Like if you just randomly walk into Harare and ask someone a question or annoy them, they'll shout at you or try physically harm you, because it's like, get out of my, like it's just, we are so quick to have these like negative emotions because really underneath it all, we're so dissatisfied with so many things, so disappointed in so many ways that doesn't take much to trigger.
Yeah, not at all.
Like I remember even, when you do something for Zimbabwe, you're like, I'll pay you them. And no, pay me now. Because they're
scared that you won't
scared
pay.
that you won't pay and you'll run away. And you're thinking, no, usually with businesses, we do 50%. Like it's normal, a deposit before and then after the job. But then they're just so worried that, or sometimes they need the money to then also hustle for other things. So it's like, there is so much there to unpack, I feel, as a people.
Do you think Zimbabweans will ever get right or feel right?
I feel like as long as the space isn't safe, then no.
I don't know if we'll even see it in our, and it really hurts to say, in our generation, our people doing well.
You know what made me think that? When we had a bit of relief when the US dollar first started, and people were like, now things are flowing. Then when things tightened again, now you can't get as easily. You have to rely on these remittance agencies. And then when the COSs, like having to go overseas to England mainly to do care work jobs, people like rush to it. So it's like, I feel like, we're just still figuring it out.
Still surviving.
We're still in survival mode, 100%.
But if there's one thing about Zimbabweans, we are survivors. I think that is one thing.
And we'll make a way.
We'll make a way and thug it out. And I think it's a blessing and a curse. Yeah. But have we been through things? Yeah.
How do you reckon we can seek help with resolving trauma? I mean, I know we've talked about therapy, but even on a day-to-day,
I think it's what you feed yourself, whether it's what you listen to, what you watch, who you follow, what you're reading. It's all the ways, and your community, who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with people who continuously bring you down and are negative, I think you need to realize the things within your power to control. And those are things like, sometimes you don't necessarily choose your family, but you can choose your friends. You can choose where you spend your time. You can choose, what you read, what you ingest, that all. And it's a lot of also self-talk. Like, how do you perceive yourself? And are you kind to yourself? Like, something that I've had to learn is to be kind to my inner child and allow her to speak up sometimes when I never listen to her. Like, so sometimes she'll be like, I feel very neglected, or I feel very unsafe here, or not protected, or you didn't have my back. When you sort of choose to appease someone else over your own feelings, like it can bring up those traumas, and then it's like, oh, actually, I need to learn to speak up for myself or look out for myself. And it's being really in tune with self and taking that time. Journaling, I'm a proponent.
She's a journal girl.
I'm a journaling girl.
I mean, essentially, you've said it all. It's like identifying your triggers. And in some ways, trying to manage that, and also your coping mechanisms. Alcohol not being one of them, please. I know a lot of people like, drugs and alcohol to forget it all, but really long term, you're not forgetting it at all. You're just setting it aside for another time. You're setting aside for your future, So I feel like, And maybe, sometimes we do look within communities if you don't have therapy accessible. People to reach out to, people you can trust, to not to trauma dump, so to speak, as much, but just to work through things.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel, especially if your trauma is recent, the quicker you get to it, the better.
Yes.
Because sometimes you're like, I don't know, with our African parents, they'll be telling you a story from 30 years ago. You're like, my guy.
Don't let
You're
things
still
fester.
not, because and only when it starts to fester, you also start to lose perspective. Like now the story is told with a bit of spice and a bit of, because over years you've mulled over it and mulled over it and
recreated it.
and and it's like, that's not quite what happened or how, and sometimes it's misunderstandings too within family structures especially. So I feel like with trauma, the sooner you can address, there's a problem here, and try find ways to resolve it, the quicker. Sometimes you don't get the opportunity. People have been displaced and lost their people in Ukraine and South Sudan. All these people have lost their homes. You can't really just, it's something you have to really work through as a family.
Yeah.
But I feel like actually even recognizing it's there is also quite crucial.
True. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being a safe space for me to work through some of my traumas. Thank you guys for listening. As always, we appreciate it. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Bye, guys.
Toodles.